And we're here in California, most of us. I don't think anyone yet is not from California. Dr. Cho is here. And so anyway, let me read this. In 2018, Paula Gene, her Senate race broke state records by garnering 48,594 primary votes, which was the highest vote count in a primary in West Virginia in 75 years. That's very amazing. She also acquired more votes even than Patrick Morrisey, who won the Republican primary with 48,000 votes. So you must have been doing some serious traveling on those roads. She's now challenging Shelley Moore Capito for, I hope I said that right, for Senate. Okay. And Capito consistently puts her party and big donors before the people that she's supposed to represent. And, you know, she's a diehard GOP loyalist who falls in line behind Mitch McConnell every time. If any of you saw the movie Knock Down the House, we hosted it here in June last year. It was a great movie. And hey, she's a movie star, which is pretty wonderful to really have your story out there to share with people. And it's on Netflix. So if anybody hasn't seen it, go watch it. It's quite wonderful because Paula Jean's a coal miner's daughter and granddaughter, and she's been fighting for clean water, clean air, and a diverse economy for the Appalachian community for decades. So I don't want to take any more of her time, but just say that she's been endorsed by Shaun King's Action PAC and is doing a great job, and we'd love to help you. So will you take it away? And I'm going to mute everyone else so that we don't have any dog barks and things like that. Take it away, Paula Gene.
Hi, y'all. It really is a pleasure to be here with you. And thank you for giving that background, but I'm going to tell you my story real quick. I was born a coal miner's daughter and granddaughter. I was born in a small community called Mullins, West Virginia, and I lived in a community called Iroquois, like the Iroquois Indians, when my mama took me home. Being a coal miner's daughter and granddaughter, I drank acid mine drainage when I was a little girl. Our water was orange with a blue and purple film, and I actually had specks of metal in it. Ugh. We cooked with it, we drank it, we did everything with it. And, you know, being a coal miner's daughter, I've dealt with the boom and the bust of the market for coal. So my stepdad got laid off in the coal mines when I was 12 years old, and we moved to North Carolina for a while. And I didn't know I wasn't a redhead till I was 12 years old. Being a coal miner's daughter and granddaughter, I've experienced what coal mining can do to my family. I'm a very proud coal miner's daughter, and I'm proud of my family sacrificing for me. But because they did work in the industry, my grandfather, he served in Korea. He was in the coal mines for 45 years, proud UMWA member. He suffocated to death. He had a good retirement and good pension because of his union, but he didn't get to enjoy his retirement years. My daddy, he served in Vietnam, and he was also a coal miner. And my dad passed away at an early age of cancer because of his exposure to asbestos in Vietnam at 52 years old, as well as black lung. Most of my family is in coal mining, my stepdad, my uncles, and I've seen a lot of black lung, and I've buried a lot of family members way too soon. When we came back to West Virginia, I got active as a mom because the mountains, it's my home. And I took it for granted that the mountains would always be here, but industry started blowing up our mountains, and mechanization took the jobs of men. Essentially, dynamite took the jobs of men. And if another country would come into Appalachia, blow up our mountains, poison our water, and put silica dust in our children's lungs for blowing up the mountains, we'd go to war. But that's what industry was allowed to do. My neighbor's daughter was 7 years old. She got cancer. They said it was environmental. They couldn't pinpoint the cause, but they were injecting coal waste underneath my town. And it got me even more active. I spoke with the United Nations. I have lobbied. I have rallied. I've done everything I could as a mother and now a grandmother to fight for my children. In 2018, nobody would primary our incumbents. I'm a firm believer in by the people, for the people, of the people. And all over West Virginia, we see it all over the country, where the people in the front lines of our communities are solving our problems, while a lot of our incumbents are not people serving, they're corporate serving, and they serve special interests. And so I did decide to primary Joe Manchin, and we talked about that race in the introduction. The reason why I decided to get into this race was because I found out I was expecting my first grandchild that was born in January. And I worry every day if my children will get cancer from our Democratic governor, one of the biggest, well, Democrat, now Republican. He ran as a Democrat to get elected and then changed his party affiliation, but he's one of the biggest polluting coal barons in West Virginia. He became my Democratic governor. He had a mountaintop removal site less than 5 miles from my house, and he was putting silica dust in my kids' lungs every day. And I'm tired of us begging. I'm tired of us begging people that are supposed to serve us. We need to quit putting our incumbents on a pedestal and realize that they are supposed to serve us. That's their job. And if they can't do their jobs, then we need to do it for them. And Shelley Moore Capito, she's been in office for over 20 years. She's our junior senator. She was the first woman to be elected to the United States Senate to represent the state of West Virginia. She's voted 3 times against equal pay for women. She doesn't stand up for women's rights. She's turned a blind eye on the children dying and starving in this state. And it's time for a real woman's voice to go to Washington, D.C. and take her on. Y'all can unmute yourselves now. I'm done.
Unmute myself so we can have a little dialogue. So anybody who has questions for Paula, please type them in the chat. I see a couple of comments. Hemming actually grew up in Virginia as a child. Well, that's not West Virginia, but it's close enough. Now, here's Tom Hubbs, who grew up in Cumberland, and his father was raised in Elk Garden. Do you know where that is?
I sure don't. Okay. But there's a lot of small towns here. You can blink when you go through them, and you may not even see the name of them.
Well, you know, I was really impressed in 2016 as a Bernie supporter that Senator Sanders actually won the Democratic primary in West Virginia.
He won all 55 counties in West Virginia.
Yeah. So my question to you is, while other people are thinking of their questions, is what influence has Senator Sanders had on your running and your ability to connect with the people of West Virginia?
Well, it's just part of our movement. I think he changed the narrative and the political dynamic across the country. And I think people realize that we shouldn't be putting these people on a pedestal, and we can run for office and we can create a government that we deserve. And, you know, Senator Sanders, he held a special place in my heart. When he came to West Virginia, he stopped in places like McDowell County that is forgotten, and was stopping in at food banks, and he held town halls. There's actually a video of me and Senator Sanders. I went to that town hall. Chris Haynes hosted it. And as an activist, long story short, I ended up being there, maybe speak on a panel, but I didn't get to. But I walked up to him and I asked him if I could have 2 minutes of his time. So I followed him to the front of the room, to the back of the room, him signing autographs, him talking to media, got back to the front of the room, and he melted me because he just threw his arms up. And he said, "Wait a minute. I told this woman that I would talk to her." He set me down. He talked to me like a human being. I felt like I was telling Grandpa about that bad thing that my brothers did that day. He was just so sweet. I cried all over him just because, as an activist, my incumbents have never treated me like I was an actual person and somebody that, you know, should even be listened to. And you know, our incumbents don't care if we live or die here. And here was this senator from Vermont sitting, you know, in this high school in McDowell County, West Virginia, and treating me like a human being. He didn't overpromise, but he has been to West Virginia. He stood shoulder to shoulder with us in the front lines of our communities and showing up even when he wasn't running for office. And he, you know, he's a leader in this movement. But I want everybody to understand too, we have to remember what he always said, because I know a lot of people are really discouraged. And he's one of the reasons I decided to run for office. You've heard him over and over and over. You know, step up, run for office from the local level to a federal level, create a government that we deserve. You know, he's given a lot to this movement. It's time for people like us to step up And, we know the importance of Congress. We know the importance of having true representatives in our local races. And it's time for us to keep our movement going. And I just encourage everybody, no matter what's going on with the presidential election, not to get discouraged, because we can do this. We're a big part of the movement. And I cannot thank Bernie Sanders for his sacrifice to this country for the years that he's given us.
Yeah, I really hear that. And I remember being so impressed when he was at a town hall and he was speaking with people about, would you have a different job? Do you really want to go in the coal mines if you had a job with the same pay and the
there's a lot
same
of
health
pride.
insurance?
There's a lot of pride here around coal mining, but the biggest lie that a politician can tell is the market for coal is going to rebound, because it's not. We've dealt with the boom and bust. In the 70s, we had over 120,000 coal miners nationwide, and now we have less than 50,000. And we do not have anybody talking about economic diversity for my state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another reason. I mean, I've been fighting for that for years. We can't put our eggs in one basket anymore. And with the decline in the market for coal, some of the people in these communities live in impoverished conditions comparable to a third world country. And, when, there's counties in West Virginia that can't even sustain Walmart, and Walmart is the biggest employer in West Virginia, and that's all you have is coal mining, then you got to rethink, because those jobs are not there anymore, and people are really suffering. And also the way this industry come in here, the Industrial Revolution was built on the backs of Appalachians. When you turn on your light switch, it's because of the blood of Appalachians and my family members. And it's prideful, but it's also sad, because the industry come in here and got rich off our backs, left us breadcrumbs, and they did not take care of the people in our communities and even worry about coal miners' families. We've been bid against each other for basic human rights, clean up water, clean air, and jobs. And you know what? We are some of the most hospitable people in the world. We do stick together, even though our incumbents have underestimated us, and we're going to fight back. And especially the women of Appalachia, it doesn't matter what they do, we're going to stick together and take care of our young. And it's not about partisan politics to us. We're going to fight back and take care of our children. The heart of the labor movement started in Appalachia with Mother Jones, Joe Hill, the miners of Blair Mountain, Mate One. And I have my ancestors' blood in my veins, and a lot of people feel that way, and we're going to fight back.
That's great. I really appreciate you giving us that insight into your state. And, we have a question from Hemi Cho. She's interested in talking, you're telling us a little bit about your primary race that's coming up on June 9th. So you obviously need help quickly, because our other candidates are until a little bit later.
So we have the absentee ballot process has been open to everybody in our state. So we have over 70,000 people that are already voting, have got their ballots, and some have already voted. And our primary date was originally May 12th. It was moved up to June 9th. Right now, we have really kicked in to get out the vote program. Our campaign is the only campaign in the race that has sworn off corporate and corporate PAC dollars. And it really solidifies that you can have a people-funded campaign and have a viable campaign. And I want to thank everybody that has donated and gave us support across the country, especially with one of the, the poorest states like mine. We have outraised everyone 8-1. We have a full staff. I have an incredible campaign manager, finance director, comms director. We have a couple people on field that is, we need volunteers to make phone calls to voters. And, also if you can donate even $5, it'd be a great deal of help just to keep us sustained as we go through to June 9th, so we can continue with our digital marketing, which is kind of a disservice to West Virginia voters, even towns like that, town halls like this. Some people in our state don't even have access to comprehensive broadband. So it's a weird time to be campaigning. But again, thank you everybody for helping us like you have. It's been overwhelming, and I'm just humbled by the support that we've received.
Yeah, I'm wondering, we did some interesting things in the last week or two, because we couldn't knock on doors or make, ran out of phone numbers to call in various states. Some people are actually doing caravan with cars, driving around, is that feasible in West
We're
Virginia?
talking about that, and we're talking about maybe having meet and greets in the streets, what we call them, where candidates and volunteers hold up signs in high traffic areas and things like that. But the biggest thing now is just making those impressions. That's how you get name recognition. Nationally, I'm known, but there's still a lot of people out in the hills and hollers that don't know my name. So we've been trying to make sure that everybody that has received an absentee ballot, and every registered Democrat in the state, which we do have more registered independents and Democrats in West Virginia than we do Republicans, by the way, which is surprising for a lot of people to hear. But we need true representation in West Virginia, and people are tired of voting for the lesser of two evils. And we need people like myself to motivate people to the polls and feel like they have something to vote for. So we're just making those impressions. And yeah, we are going to get out and do some things, but the phone calls and the text are the biggest thing that we're focusing on now, trying to reach voters. I spent a lot of time, I don't know which one of you guys I spoke to on the phone when I was making donor calls, but right now during this pandemic, it's a lot of time calling donors because it's grassroots, and then the rest of the time I'm calling voters. And then we have a lot of people that are doing the same and helping.
So do you have specific days of the week that we could phone bank for you?
Well, I'll tell you what, email Andrew. He's our field director, Andrew at paulagene.com, and he's got the schedule, and he's scheduling folks in for phone banking time.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm sure I'll be interested. And of course, to donate to your campaign, we can simply go to actblue.com and search.
Well, paulagene.com, Gene with a J, and
okay,
the donate link's right there on the website.
Money, whether we go to ActBlue or we go directly to your
right.
website.
Well, it just takes you to the ActBlue link. It's just easier to remember. paulagene.com. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's great. So someone has asked if the Democratic National Committee is helping you yet.
No, they haven't. That's just is what it is. It's a primary too. So oftentimes too, you hear from the party that they don't want to show biases during a primary. So.
What do you think of your other candidates' chances against you, considering you have the experience of having run before and did so well?
Well, we don't flip-flop. I've never flip-flopped on the issues. I'm the only candidate in the race, like I said, that has a viable team to actually go up against our incumbent. So that's to our advantage. And, I stick by the issues. I've always unforgivingly stood behind Medicare for all because West Virginia needs it so bad, and people across the country. Economic diversity. I've spent a lot of time with leaders in the front lines of our communities about addiction. We lead in drug overdose in the country, and we hear oftentimes from our incumbents about the war on drugs and, drug replacement therapy. They want to invest a lot in that, which plays a vital role in recovery. However, it takes that money and puts it back into big pharma, so it goes back into that monopoly. And it's been proven that long-term recovery systems work, and they don't have the support on a state level and a federal level. And that's one of the first things I want to do when I get to Congress is make sure that we have one of those long-term recovery centers available in every corner in every state that needs it, and make sure that they are fully funded and they have the support that they need.
Thank you. I see another question about labor, because we talked about that a little earlier. Have you been endorsed by a state labor?
The ACLU has decided to stay out of this race because me and one of my stronger primary opponents are both very pro-union, and they've decided that they're going to sit it out to the general.
Okay, that's fair.
And I see the Green New Deal question. What do you think about the Green New Deal? I'm a definite advocate for the Green New Deal. It would help states like mine as far as trying to create economic diversity, as well as going to Congress and getting behind the Reclaim Act so we can restructure in states like ours. We do need funds like here, Flint, Michigan, and other parts of the country that are really struggling, and making sure that we do have federal funding, like even with the car industry, they are in the coal industry here. We have to make sure that we have just transition, and we don't have that now. We have a lot of people that are starving because of the decline in markets.
And how is your state doing with COVID-19 compared to the surrounding areas?
Oh gosh. Well, our governor has taken the steps to open up our state, which I think is very irresponsible. So on a state level, We're talking about opening up when we already have people that were dealing with the water crisis, you know, like in Payton City, West Virginia. They was already declared a state of emergency and begging for clean water. So in addition to that, having to deal with that, now they're having to deal with, you know, feeding people and getting food to each other and dealing with, you know, this pandemic. But a lot of people in the hills and hollers that don't have access to comprehensive broadband, you know, they're forgotten. Some people haven't seen the light of day in weeks. We don't know if they're sick. You know, they live in food deserts. Instead of opening up our states like mine, and they say it's because of population, that they're going to open us up. And we have been proven to be one of the most vulnerable states because of lung disease, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and things like that. And we have a large population of elderly that's not been checked on. We need to make sure that we send out the National Guard with relief. And on a federal level, I'm really frustrated because they say they're going to open up our state because of the economy. You know, if we can give trillions of dollars to bail out Wall Street, we can sit this out until we figure it out, and we can make sure that everybody has a $2,000 stimulus a month, as well, in addition to sending relief into our states on a federal level as well, and making sure that people are taken care of, and, you know, public health and safety comes first and foremost. Here in West Virginia, you know, the reason why I'm running for office is because they don't care if we live or die here. We've been treated like collateral damage, and now we're in the middle of this pandemic and they want to treat us like a test case. And how are we supposed to trust these people when they didn't even care if we lived or died to begin with? We do have a petition on our website too. If you can sign that, that's to petition our governor. Okay. And also petition Joe Manchin and Shelley Moore Capito, you know, both of our senators, to send relief efforts in their state and not treat us like a test case.
Wow. Well, I want to thank you so much. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd like to, you know, mention? Any economic diversity issues?
Well, as far as economic diversity, I mean, the possibilities are endless for our state. We just need visionaries for our future instead of visionaries for our demise. I say it over and over. We legalize cannabis. We would see economic growth within 6 to 8 months. If we, you know, grew hemp on mountaintop removal sites, not only does it, you know, revitalize the land, but we can also tap in the, you know, the economic benefits of that. We have a lot of potential for hydropower, geothermal. We have a lot of hot spots in West Virginia for geothermal. If we have good roads, good schools, a good infrastructure, is going to create business here, as well as, you know, expanding comprehensive broadband instead of just talking about it. Making sure that we have clean water, clean air, adequate sewage systems. A lot of people in our state still don't even have adequate sewage systems. Like I said, the possibilities are endless. We just have to make sure that we have people in place that are going to try to do something for our state so we can grow. Yeah.
Fabulous. Well, I thank you so very much for being with us tonight. And sorry it's so late.
Oh, no.
But, you know, we're just getting started here. So we're definitely wanting to support you in every way we can. So
thank you so very much for having me. And if you guys need anything from us too, feel free to reach out.
Okay. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with all the information.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. And I see that Jim is ready to say hello to Betsy, who is our next candidate visiting. Jim, I'm going to unmute you, and Betsy's already unmuted. Great. So take it away.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say that it's my great pleasure to introduce to this meeting Betsy Smith, who is running in Maine, and she's running to replace the notorious now Susan Collins. And her primary in Maine will be on July 14th. I think she'll have a lot to tell us about what she's been doing in her life. I think we could describe her certainly as a true progressive. She's been an activist, according to her own calculations, for 37 years. So there's been an awful lot of stuff that she's been doing, and I hope she can tell us about some of that. But I just want to give you one idea of her kind of activism. and that is that she has been responsible, or largely responsible, for two very pioneering pieces of legislation that we don't have, as far as I know, we don't have anything like it in California, but she did work and have it passed in Maine. One was the first medical leave act in the whole United States. And the second one, I don't know how many people here have been involved in the Clean Money campaign in California, but Betsy was the one who wrote and helped create the Clean Money electoral system. So those are major accomplishments for any activist, and I'm sure there's a lot more. Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm so happy to be with you, and I hope you are all safe and well and doing okay through this uncharted territory that we're all living through, and trying to just put one foot in front of the other, and then trying to run a state Senate campaign on top of that, a U.S. Senate campaign on top of that. So, but I'm very, very happy to be with you, and I'm so grateful for the endorsement of PDA, and so grateful for the help that all of you give to so many candidates and to so many causes. So you're awesome, and thank you for showing up. It's easy these days, I think, to get cynical and to drop out or to hang back. And so the fact that you're here and you're so willing to help is really, really awesome. So let me just say a little bit about why I'm running, and we'll tell you a little bit about the race and where we are. I'm running because I think we're in trouble. I think we're in trouble as a democracy. And I think this pandemic, before the pandemic, I thought we were in trouble. And now I think we can see this pandemic has exposed the fragility of our economic system, of our healthcare system, of how we relate to one another, that is so intense. And we see the injustice of it. We see how it affects communities of color. We see how it affects low-income people, elderly, more intensely than it does anybody else. And so I think we're seeing the kind of thing that puts us in a position that we right now, I think, are in this position as we start to maybe, hopefully, come out of it a little bit. And the question is not how do we reopen America, but how do we reimagine America? And that is our opportunity. You know, that is the incredible opportunity that we face in 2020 through every election, all the way up and down the ballot, is we have a chance now to reimagine the way we do things, why we do things, and how we do things. And, you know, I think that for so many of us, we have been involved in these policy issues for a long time. But isn't it ironic that the policy issues that we have been working on, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, and a fair wage, and all of those things that I know all of you care about, are the very things that are getting us through this pandemic. And they are the very things that are being proposed to get us out of the economic collapse that we're in. And so now all of a sudden, ideas that were considered outside the norm or outside the mainstream now sound like a very good idea. And so I think that, you know, I have made a career out of, unintentionally, I think, of making the impossible possible. I was the youngest of 5 kids. And so my dad always said to us kids, you know, you kids, you make sure when you leave a place, you leave it better than you found it. So he meant sweep the floor and make the bed. I thought he meant change the world. So I was like, okay, I'm on it. I'm ready. And so I started knocking on doors for the Equal Rights Amendment back in 1978. And then I went to work for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, working on the military budget, and to try and stop the arms race back during the height of the Cold War. And then when I came to Maine, I started working for the Maine Women's Lobby, which was the only organization of its kind back in the 80s, early 80s, to make sure that women were present for every kind of issue there was, not just for the ones that we had been, you know, told you can work on reproductive choice and you can work on daycare. But the first thing I did when I got there was to help raise the minimum wage for the first time in decades in Maine, because mostly it was you know, women who were earning minimum wage. And so anyway, we did that. And then as Jim said, I drafted and helped pass the first Family Medical Leave Act in the country, which then became the model for the national legislation. And then through all this work, and I worked on every budget that's come down the pike. I've worked on women's reproductive choice. I've worked on LGBTQ issues. I've worked on union issues. pretty much if there's an environmental issues, if there's been a progressive issue at Maine, I have been involved in working on it as professionally as well as personally. And, one of the things that I was so concerned about along with a number of progressive allies back in the mid-90s was the impact of money in politics. So back then we were horrified that a state Senate race cost $6,000 to run. Now we'd be like, oh, $6,000, that's nothing, but we were horrified then. And we knew where the money was, and we could see where the money was coming from. And so we got together and I helped do the research with a bunch of interns in my attic one very hot summer. And I said, we're never going to pass this unless we can show people clear examples of a bill that was passed or voted on one way, the money came in and the vote changed. And so not only did we find one of those examples, we found many of them. And we produced a report called Elections or Auctions. Who is paying for Maine's elections? And when we showed people that and we got press around that, the legislature was basically shamed into passing the first public financing system of elections in the country. And so we've had it here in Maine, and if they've tried to whittle away at it and they've tried to undo it many times, but people have held firm. So you can run now in Maine, not for federal office, unfortunately, but you can run for office with public financing. And it's changed who can run, it's changed how we run, and it's changed what we do. So all of the things that I've talked about before, those are just a few things that I've done in my career, but all of them, the thread that puts them all together is that all of them were considered impossible, and we were told were impossible until we made them possible through organizing, through educating, through appealing to common values, people's common values and common sense. And that's how we got those things passed. And so I'm running partially also because I think, well, what they're telling us is impossible now, right? Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, debt-free college education. Those things that they say, oh, that's a pipe dream. And then I think about, especially like in healthcare, right? We look at healthcare and, even in the Democratic presidential primary, we heard from Democrats that people love their healthcare from their employers. They love it. Well, now we have how many millions of people, 30 million people, almost 40 million people now unemployed, who's not only lost their jobs, but they've lost their healthcare. And so now that idea of marrying healthcare to employment doesn't seem like such a good idea, which I think puts a window for us around Medicare for all that we have never had. This is how Social Security was founded, right? After, right, we had an economic collapse and there were so many low-income people, seniors, and then Social Security came through. So maybe, just maybe, one silver lining of this terrible thing that we're all going through is that we will get Medicare for all, that we will get universal single-payer coverage. And so I think those are the things that we can do. And I think that one of the things we have to be one of the things that I'm really careful about and I'm really concerned about is we really have to say we're not going to wait. We're not going to wait anymore. We've been told, wait, just hold on. It's not the right time. We can make a few little changes. We can do a little bit here and there. Well, I'm tired of waiting. Americans are tired of waiting. We all agree. We all agree on these major things. And the gulf is not, and the divide in this country, in my view, is not right and left. It's not conservative and liberal. It's up and down. It's that there is an elite, an economic elite, a political elite that is really separated from the rest of us in this country and separated from our reality, separated from how we live every day. I think it's really challenging. And so to me, that's the division. And we need to say, why is it that these things that American people say they want and need and are important to our lives are not happening in Congress? And for me, I think one of the major reasons is money in politics. But I think there's a number of reasons, but that's the major one. So I think this is our time. We have enough force. We have enough force together to start to move these things and to get over that hurdle and then to demand that we hold elections, not auctions. And so I think that's, I think we can do this. In my race, I'm going to tell you a little bit. I'm in a primary, a three-way primary, in which there are basically two primary candidates. One who has been endorsed fully by the DSCC, the National Democratic Party, who does not support Medicare for all, who does not support a Green New Deal, really wants to make those incremental changes. And then me, and I ran for governor 2 years ago and came very close. I came within 1,200 votes of winning. And then there's another candidate who's running basically to break some ground as a non-binary candidate and is doing a wonderful job of that. But the other thing in Maine that's awesome is we have ranked choice voting. So it leaves a huge pathway for progressives to actually win, because people can vote what's in their heart without having to do that calculation of like, oh, well, I really like her, but I don't know if she can actually win. Because with ranked choice voting, you can vote your heart, and then your second vote can be for whoever else until you get to, until somebody wins. So we have an extraordinary opportunity to unseat Senator Collins and to do so with a strong progressive. So that's why I'm in it. I'm so excited. I'd love to take your questions and hear what you have to say. And I think there's some questions already, but yeah. So thank you again for having me.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we have a few questions here. And I have a few of my own, but let me start with some that to talk directly, raise questions about what you've already said.
Okay.
The first one is what says, what finances public elections? That is to say, I guess, how does that work? What's the mechanism for the system in Maine?
It's really awesome. It's really, and again, unfortunately, it doesn't apply to federal elections. But basically, what you have to do to register to qualify as a clean elections candidate is you have to collect a number of $5 contributions from people in your district. So for the House, it's 25. For the Senate, it's 60. And once you collect that many $5 contributions to show that you're viable and show that you have some support, then you get taxpayer money. From the general fund that matches, well, doesn't match, that gives you a set amount. And that changes every year depending on, I believe it's the average plus 10% of what the cost of elections were the time before. So, and then for governor, I had to get 3,200 $5 contributions, and you get levels. And so if you come in and you get the first amount, then you get you get a starter amount of money. And then when you get, if you're growing and your viability is growing, then you reach another threshold and you get more money, so that's how it works. And it's 62% of our legislators in Maine actually run using the system. So it's incredible. And I plan to enact it on the federal level. So we have it for the federal level until we can overturn Citizens United. This is an interim step.
Okay. Because you mentioned a lot so far about the importance of Medicare for all.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of our questions here are basically practical questions, and that is, how do we get Medicare for all?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can do your part, but what are there larger strategies where we can do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this all the time because I think it is the number one issue that we're, the people that I talk to, no matter where I go, we're like California, we're a big, big state. But it doesn't matter where I go. This is the number one issue that people are facing, and their fear around it. So I think that there's, again, as I said in my remarks, I think that COVID-19 and this experience of people not having adequate insurance and people not having, it goes the same thing for paid sick leave, not only hurts the people who are sick, but, and I would hope that we all want everyone to feel well and do well. And so, we have that kindness, human spirit. But even if you're very selfish and you only care about yourself, if I only care about myself and Jim has not gone to the doctor because he doesn't have health insurance, or he hasn't stayed home because he doesn't have paid sick leave, well, now in an airborne pandemic, he's going to get me sick. So I want him to have that so he doesn't get me sick. I mean, ideally I would love it because I care about Jim and I want him to be okay. But even if I don't, and so I think that's an opportunity that we have, and we have to go organize the 38 million people who've lost their health insurance. And we have to be talking about that. And then in terms of the practicality of it, I think that one of the things we have to do is we have to fix Medicare so that it covers everything and we don't have supplement A and supplement B and all that. We fix it, and then we just start and adjust, I say, and then we start lowering the age for which you qualify, And that it's a system that already exists. It's a system that people understand, and it's just a matter of expanding what we have. So I think that's a relatively easy way to get into the details. But I think most importantly is we have to demand it. We have to start organizing people to demand, and say every other country in the world does this. What is wrong with us? How is it possible that the richest, most industrialized nation of the world, who has some of the worst health outcomes with our current system, right? According to the World Health Organization, we're 37th in the world in terms of health outcomes with the most expensive system. And not everybody's covered. So something is very wrong, And I think we have to just keep talking about that. And I think we have to connect the dots for people about the connection between the pharmaceutical contributions to candidates and the insurance company contributions to candidates, and connect the dots and say, you want to know why we don't have it? And that's why. It's the $7 billion of pharmaceutical industry spent last cycle on politicians and lining their pockets, or the millions of dollars that the health insurance industry spends. So I think when we put that all together, it's sort of like how we got clean elections back in the 90s, right? It was like, oh, well, it's so obvious and so embarrassing that you don't want to do this, that eventually something goes forward. So I hope we're at that tipping point.
Just to follow up on that, we know here in California and many other states, there have been these strong campaigns for either a state version of Medicare for all or a national version or both. What kind of a movement is going on about this in Maine?
Well, we have had, so we just had a referendum last year, I think, maybe 2 years ago, on expansion of Medicaid, which was very much a move towards single payer. It was to expand Medicaid under the ACA. And, again, in Maine, and I think it's around the country, when people get to vote on it, that was approved overwhelmingly. It wasn't even a question, even though there was an attempt to say, no, you can't do it. It's too expensive. It's too whatever. People are like, no, people deserve health care. So I think that, and then we have a group called Maine All Care, and they are putting a referendum on the ballot for next November, again, requiring single payer. So.
Okay. I'm going to switch the subject a little bit to this question. How do you think women are doing post-ERA? What do we need to do to advance the status of women?
Yeah. Well,
you've been deeply involved in that, we know.
Yeah, I've been very deeply involved in it. And it's ironic to me that I started out in 1978 when I was 3. I'm just kidding. In 1978, I started out knocking on doors. And what we were trying to do was extend the time that states had to ratify. And now here we are right back at that same question in 2020, because we don't have the ERA yet. I mean, a lot of states have it, but we don't have a federal ERA, which is, absurd, right? I mean, really? So anyway, so I think we have to get the ERA. But I think that one of the things that we have to do is, certainly the wage differential is still very much part of the picture that we have not addressed. And I think we need wage equality. And one of the things that we just passed here in Maine was a wage equity bill that basically allowed people to know what other people were making, because that's one of the ways that they've kept us telling, so we didn't know. Because if you don't know that the guy next to you is doing the same job and making $10,000 more, how can you fight it? Because you don't know. So this allows it. And the other thing it does is it doesn't allow people to ask you what your former salary was for your job. So that, because often, if you start out at a lower salary because there's sexism, and then you go to the next job and they say, well, what was your previous salary? And it was $30,000. Well, they're not going to offer you $60,000. They're going to offer you $35,000, or you know what I mean? So those are they're small tweaks, but they get at some of the issues. And I think, we need an ERA. We need a pay equity bill that is enforceable. And, obviously maintaining reproductive choice, which is now in peril because of my senator, who I'm hoping to replace. That's a big part of economic equity as well. So I think there's a lot to do. I think we have a lot to do. And I think one of the ways that we're going to do it is to elect a lot of progressive women.
But just briefly, what's the primary situation that you'll be running in? How many candidates are there, and how is that going to work? Awesome.
So I have 3 candidates in the race. I'm the only candidate who has run a statewide race before. I ran for governor 2 years ago. And again, I was in a 7-way primary, and I ran as a clean elections candidate using public financing, only candidate to do so. And the Democratic establishment, I think, thought that I was going to come in 7th. And I came in within 1,200 votes of winning that nomination. And so people were like, whoa, what's that? So, and then I'm running against a woman who is the current Speaker of the House in Maine, and is, very lovely human being, very much a traditional Democrat. And as I said, not interested in Medicare for all, not interested in the Green New Deal, and has never run statewide, has only won her House race in Maine in a small area with 3,000 votes. So, but they have thrown the entire machine at her. So she's spent $10 million so far on this primary. In a primary that's probably going to have 100,000 voters, which to me is obscene. And I think it's starting to work against her. People are like, we're in a time when people don't have jobs and enough food, and you're spending $10 million with 100,000 voters. Like, that is really wrong, and people in Maine are mad that Washington wants to tell us who our candidates should be. And, so we're pretty independent that way. And then the third person is an attorney who is she just describes herself as a non-binary gender person, and is really running to create a pathway for people in the future. Is not raising any money, participates in debates and stuff, but is not, and they're awesome. They're awesome. But again, with ranked choice voting, it's awesome. We get to, vote for all of us.
Okay, I want to get back to another one of your major issues in terms of what we can do and what you think you can do, and that is the question of how to get money out of politics. You've been somewhat successful in Maine, but we've got this enormous monster on the national level.
Yeah. Well, I think there's three things we have to do. And one, everybody I think knows, which is overturn Citizens United, which I actually think which was the court case that said corporations are people and speech is money, or money is speech. And, I think actually if we could get that through the juggernaut of the Congress, the American people would overturn it like that, because we all get it. But I think getting it through the people who use it very much to their own advantage is going to be more difficult. So I think that's the obvious one. The second one is to create a clean election system, an optional clean election system like we have here in Maine, that pairs small donors with public financing, so that you have that. And I think we could do that on a federal level pretty easily. And the third thing, and this is the one that I like the most of that, is to limit the campaign season to 12 weeks. Because nobody needs to listen to this for years on end. And the only people who benefit is what I call the political industrial complex in Washington, all the consultants who tell you what to wear and what to say and how to say it and what you shouldn't do and what you should do, all that kind of stuff. And so, let me just make it really clear that you could campaign by doing this, by meeting with people, talking in people's kitchens, having town halls, going around for years if you wanted to. What you couldn't do is raise and spend money except for that 12 weeks. So just think how that would change the number of negative ads that are in, the number of pieces of negative stuff in your mailbox. And if you had to raise less money because it was less time, right, then it wouldn't be as big an issue. So those are the three things that I would do right off.
Okay, I'm going to turn to a really tough one now. This may be the last question we have time for, but you mentioned it. And that has to do with the question of you used the word reimagining, and especially with respect to military and military spending. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could give us some idea of what you would do and how you think we could get there.
Yeah. Well, I think we actually, again, I think COVID-19, ironically and sadly probably, provides us with an opportunity to redefine from the big picture what national security means. Right? Our military budget is all about, allegedly, keeping us secure as a people, as a country. And here we face this pandemic that has made us very insecure, that no dime of the military spending that we spend is helping us. We have and I know I'm telling you what you already know, that our military budget is larger than the next 7 countries combined. And it is much more driven by the needs of defense contractors than it is by what we need to keep secure. If there are going to be wars the next round, whatever, the wars we're going to face are not going to be fought with bombers and missiles and nuclear weapons and the things we spend billions of dollars on. They're going to be drones. They're going to be cyber wars, as we already see. And we are woefully unprepared for that, as we are woefully unprepared for climate change, which I think is a national security threat, and these pandemics, and this is the first, but it won't be the last. And so I think we have to really look at how we redefine national security for this country, and then we have to change our military spending accordingly. And again, it's the pipeline, that same pipeline of defense contractors giving millions of dollars and lining the pockets of politicians on both sides of the aisle with millions of dollars, so that then they vote through those spending programs. And they, I started working on this back in the early 80s. I don't know if any of you remember, some of you might, there was a poster that said, "It'll be a great day when our schools get all the money they need and the Air Force has to hold a bake sale to buy a bomber."
Bake sale, right? Yeah.
That was me. That was my when I worked for the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. But so I think those are the things that we have to really talk about. And I think the other thing is that Congress has really abdicated its role in foreign policy. Through the not enforcing the War Powers Act and the authorization of the use of military force that came in after 9/11. Congress said, we're done. We're just going to let the president do this. And when they've tried to get it back, Congress doesn't actually want it, because they don't want politically to have to decide whether or not we're going to use force somewhere. They don't want to have to make decisions about whether to go to war in Iraq or Afghanistan. And so they're I was going to say chicken shit, but I guess I'm not supposed to say that. But you know what? So it's like, it's an abdication of responsibility, which has political implications, but it also has serious financial implications, and it has total implications about priorities and where we are in terms of how we set priorities. I will never again allow someone to say we can't afford it, whether it's for medical care for all or for college for kids. This idea that we can't afford it. We have more money in the federal budget than we've ever had. The question is our priorities. And that is the conversation we have to have. And the military spending that takes up, more than half of our budget is the obvious first place to start.
Thank you very much. Now let's finish by one other question, and that is, what can we do to help you?
Oh, well, thank you so much. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so very grateful, again, for all the work that you do. So we have, we are all, none of us have a playbook for this, how we're doing this, but we are doing phone calling every day. We are phone banking. We have made, we've made 70,000 calls in Maine. And we, as I said, I think we're only going to have 100,000 people vote in this election. So calling would help us. We phone bank every Wednesday and every Sunday, and we're about to add one more day. You can do that from anywhere in the country. We'll make it easy for you. That would be a huge help. Sharing our social media. If you go on to Betsy Sweet me, and share it out to your friends, make sure people know about us. That would be awesome. And if you can help donate, again, anything you can do in terms of a donation would be huge. We are about to enter, we have 49 days till our primary, and we're about to enter the time where we're going to try and get up more of our digital ads. We have our state convention, our virtual state convention, in which we are launching on Sunday, in which we are launching our 6-minute speech, I guess. I don't know, but it's awesome. And we just want to get it out there, make sure people know, have it out there. So that's another way that you can help. So those are ways that you can all help. And if anybody loves to do letter writing, we can send you a list and you can print it off on your computer and do that as well. So if you just go to betsysweet.com, and there's a volunteer thing, or you can write to Abigail at betsysweet.com, who's my field person. She can help you. So those would all be incredibly helpful. And again, you're awesome for being so engaged and involved. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much, and good luck.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you all. Take good care. And I'm going to stay on for a minute and say hi to Andrew. Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Nice to see you finally. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Betsy Sweet. This is Heming Cho. I will be announcing Andrew, and thank you so much for joining us. Andrew Romanoff is running to replace Senator Cory Gardner in Colorado, and that is one of the possibly most vulnerable seats, Senate seats in 2020. He was elected 4 terms in the Colorado House of Representatives and 2 terms as Speaker of the House. And he was distinguished as one of the most effective legislators there in America. Andrew's career has also taken him from work battling neo-Nazi groups and the Ku Klux Klan at the Southern Polity Law Center, great organization, to also teaching English in Nicaragua in the wake of the brutal Civil War. He's also been leading the charge to support mental health and substance use orders in Colorado. I'm really grateful to be able to announce Andrew Romanoff, and welcome. Your
Thank you.
mic is on. Yes.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for sharing a little bit of your evening. I wish I were with you for a number of reasons. One, because my whole family lives in the Bay Area. My mom is in North Beach. My sister is in Petaluma. My aunt and uncle are in Lafayette. My cousin Mac is in San Francisco as well. I spent a lot of time on BART, although you can't get to my sister there. I take the ferry. In any event, I'm really happy to join you and happy to share a few minutes about our campaign and save some time for your questions. My name, as you heard, is Andrew Romanoff. I am running to replace Cory Gardner in the U.S. Senate. He is the most vulnerable Republican in the Republican caucus. He is representing a state that Secretary Clinton carried in 2016, and it's not Trump country. Cory held a rally when that was still possible with Donald Trump a couple months ago, and Trump said he had voted with him 100% of the time. That's part of the problem. In order to get to Cory Gardner, I've got to go through John Hickenlooper. So I'll just provide a little bit of context on our race. This field started with 20 Democratic candidates or so. It's now down to 2, John Hickenlooper and I. I'll support the Democratic nominee in this race no matter what. I said that at the beginning. I'm saying it now that we have about 2 weeks before ballots go out. But there are real differences in this race between Hick and me. And I will spell them out because I know your time is short. As you heard, I led the Democrats here to our first majority in 30 years, became Speaker of the House, and got recognized as the best legislative leader in America. Mr. Hickenlooper, on the other hand, spent most of his time running for president last year by announcing he would be a terrible senator, didn't want the job, and would hate doing it. I believe him. That's one difference between us. On the issues that matter most to me, and I hope to you, I'm grateful to have the support of PDA, both in Colorado and nationally, the climate crisis, the fate of life on Earth. I support strongly a Green New Deal. I do not think we can move swiftly enough to replace fossil fuel with renewable energy, to transform our electrical codes, our building codes, our transportation system to increase energy efficiency. We need to do all that now. John Hickenlooper takes a different view. He sued communities that tried to restrict fracking, literally drank the fracking fluid, and takes money, just like Cory Gardner, from the fossil fuel industry. You cannot simply replace Cory Gardner with somebody like that if you expect to get the kind of bold climate action we need. We need a climate champion in the U.S. Senate. That's what I aim to be. So we differ on those issues, around energy and the environment, and on healthcare. As you heard, I spent the last 4 years running a mental health organization, championing the cause of mental health treatment and drug addiction treatment. And I'll just share with you a personal story from that experience. I joined that organization. It's called Mental Health Colorado because I lost someone I loved to suicide 5 years ago. I would do anything to bring her back. I can't do that. But I know that we're not alone because we've seen so many families here in Colorado, in California, and across the country devastated by mental illness or drug addiction or suicide. And I know it's easy to get lost in this conversation about the 28 million Americans who are uninsured, or the 44 million who are underinsured, or the 500,000 who go bankrupt each year because they can't afford their medical bills. So I'll just tell you one story from my experience. I met a dad a few years ago when I was running this organization whose son had depression, deep depression. He experienced a bout of psychosis. He needed treatment. His dad's insurance plan was supposed to cover it. But when the dad submitted a claim, the insurance company said no. So the dad appealed the decision, and the company said no. And the dad appealed again. The company continued to deny his claims until his son killed himself at the age of 14. 3 weeks later, his dad got a letter in the mail from the insurance company reversing its decision and agreeing to cover his son's treatment. I will tell you, speaking not as a candidate, but just as a human being, it is deeply painful to me to have conversations with moms and dads who have lost their kids, not only to a disease we can treat, but also to the indifference of an industry that bases its profits on its ability to deny as many claims and exclude as many sick people as possible. That's the business model. And it's a great model if you're an insurance company. It's a pretty lousy model for the rest of us. I strongly support Medicare for all, a place that so many other countries have figured out is a better way to cover their population at half the cost. We're trapped in this broken model in part because the insurance companies and the drug companies and all the other forces you already know about are bankrolling members of Congress. And I wish I could tell you it was just Republicans at fault. But there are Democrats who are standing in the way, and John Hickenlooper is one of them. He not only opposes Medicare for all, get this, he describes the progressive platform that you and I share as, in his words, the discredited ideas of Karl Marx and Joseph Stalin. Stalin. I mean, these are the kind of attacks you expect to hear and do from a Republican, but not from a Democrat. How on earth are we ever going to get the climate action we need or the healthcare reform we need if we simply replace a Republican with a Democrat who's parroting his talking points? We won't. So the good news is we don't have to settle for that. We won the caucuses here. I took the caucuses by almost 2-1 over Mr. Hickenlooper in March. We won most of the county assemblies. We won the state convention with 90% of the vote. That's great. But we have only 5 weeks left before this election is decided. Only 2 weeks, in fact, before ballots go out. Colorado is a universal mail-in state. So 2.4 million voters will begin to get ballots in the mail on June 10th. Democrats and unaffiliated voters, both. The good news is in our state, if you add up the votes that both Senator Warren and Senator Sanders received, you get to be a majority. We carried Colorado for Bernie here in March. And so it's hard for me to imagine somebody voting for Sanders and Hickenlooper when Hickenlooper's entire campaign was based on ridiculing Sanders and trashing his agenda. But I know that he's got a lot more name recognition than I do. Hick was governor for 8 years. And if people don't pay any attention, if they just vote for the name they know today, he'll win. It's actually not going to be close unless we actually get the resources that we need to communicate with voters. What we found in our polling, and I'll just share this for your benefit among us chickens here, is that Hickenlooper's support is based on nothing but name recognition. That's it. When you actually provide information, I'm talking about facts, not character attacks, just actual evidence. Did you know this is a guy who sued communities that tried to restrict fracking, drank the fracking fluid, takes money from the fossil fuel industry, opposes Medicare for all and the Green New Deal, demonizes progressives by comparing them to Joseph Stalin, apologized for signing a gun control law? We could talk about that if you want. And by the way, told everybody on earth that he'd be a terrible senator and didn't want the job. If you actually lay that out against my record as one of the most effective legislative leaders in America on a bold progressive platform, if you compare the two, we win. And Hick knows that too. That's one of the reasons, the last thing I'll tell you, that he hasn't shown up. Mr. Hickenlooper has skipped 19 debates so far. 19. College students, climate activists, the Sunrise Movement, which endorsed me, they've all invited us. The NAACP, progressive veterans here. All these groups have hosted debates. Most of the other Democratic candidates and I showed up. Hickenlooper offered neither an explanation nor a surrogate. At first he said there were scheduling conflicts. That's a little hard to buy after 19 debates when you miss them. Then he said he needed more sleep. I'm happy to accommodate him, and I hope you'll help.
Great, thank you so much. I'm starting to see some questions on the side, and anybody who has a question for Mr. Romanoff, please add it to our chat. The first one is, would you pledge to support the We the People amendment to repeal the Buckley versus Vallejo and Citizens United versus FEC SCOTUS decisions, and swear off big campaign contributions? It's the same pledge that Bernie made?
Yes, and you'll find that pledge on my, sorry, it's a call coming in. You'll find that pledge on my website. I think both decisions are at fault here. We don't take money from special interest groups. I don't think corporations are people, and I don't think money should be treated as speech. Great.
A question for you from me is, in terms of this race, how do you think that it's shaping up, and what do you think your biggest sort of obstacles are, and what do you think your chances are?
Well, if I win the primary, I'll win the whole thing. I'm quite confident of that. Gardner's approval rating in Colorado is down to the low 30s. He trails even a generic Democrat by double digits. This is not Trump country. He'll not be here for a second term. I think Hick will actually have a tougher time against him, partly because of the baggage he's acquired by telling everybody what a terrible senator he would be, and partly because if you happen to live, say, in the zone where people have been fracking, and your kids now have a higher rate of birth defects, or you have trouble breathing or drinking the water, it's tough to explain why they should vote for you. For me, the biggest challenge is Hickenlooper's money and name recognition. The Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee recruited him into this race as a consolation prize when he didn't get to be president, didn't mind the fact that he told them he wasn't cut out for the job, have bankrolled his campaign, plowing hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions now, into his effort. Don't particularly care about what the people of Colorado want. I've earned endorsements from 375 county commissioners, mayors, school board members, city council members, and legislators all across the state. We actually earned 10 times as many endorsements as all the other Democratic candidates combined. But that's no concern, obviously, to the DSCC. The good news I tell folks is Chuck Schumer doesn't actually vote in Colorado. He just acts that way. So we're doing our level best to raise enough money to counter Hickenlooper's cash advantage, which is substantial. We've raised almost $3 million so far, which sounds like a lot until you consider the fact that Hick has raised $9 million. And I feel a great deal of urgency, as you can probably tell, not only because these crises represent matters of life and death, but also because voting starts in 2 weeks.
Right. Very true. Those are really great stats to look at. Another question about the environment. Have you read the Red Deal, and how do you feel about Indigenous peoples' rights and frontline communities in terms of the eco values and the climate destruction that's happening right now?
I haven't read the Red Deal. It sounds like I need to. I strongly support the rights of Indigenous people in every aspect, both because it represents one of America's original and persistent sins, and because we can tell that our mistreatment of our First Peoples has resulted in disproportionate rates of death and economic despair, and inadequate healthcare and education and housing. We could learn a lot when it comes to being better stewards of the planet if we actually paid heed to the example the first inhabitants of this land have offered. I think we should also pay attention to the unaccounted perpetrators of rape and murder among Indigenous women and girls. And I think we should provide full representation, not just reparations and remediation, but representation for the Native American population in the halls of power.
Great. That's wonderful. Okay, I will actually send you the full text of the Red Deal. Are there other questions from this group for Andrew? I think that you're such a strong candidate that people feel like they already know that they want to support you. Well, let me ask you this then. What are the things that we here in San Francisco and the Bay Area, Oakland in particular, because this is 2 chapters of PDA, San Francisco and Oakland, what do you think would be most helpful from us in order to support your candidacy?
Sure. So a couple things. By the way, I took one of my first jobs in Oakland, working for the mayor's office then, but I'm dating myself because the mayor at the time was Elihu Harris. So there's 3 things that you all can do. One is to contribute to the campaign. We're not taking money from the insurance industry, the drug companies, the big fossil fuel companies. I should acknowledge they're not offering. I mean, they've got other preferences in this race, and that's fine by me. I don't want to do their bidding anyway. So we need as much cash as we can to fund our television budget. We're trying to get ads on the air as soon as next week if we can afford it. You can contribute up to $2,800. Anything you can chip in would be a big help right now. I'm not going to worry about the general election, partly because we don't have the luxury of thinking past June 30th, and also because I recognize that I'll have a lot more friends on July 1st. Washington's a transactional town. The same crowd that's bankrolling Hickenlooper has said they'll support me if I win the primary too. So I'm just focused on the next 5 weeks. Contributions, financial contributions, the single most important. You can help us contact voters. I saw a question fly by here on phone banking. we're both phoning and texting voters. We can't knock on doors, obviously, but we have an app to text voters. I've used it. I have literally, you're not going to believe this, texted 600,000 voters in the last 8 weeks, personally, one at a time. And I'm having conversations with them. I'm happy to share some of those with you if we have time. So you can phone or text voters. You can make a contribution to the campaign, and you can co-host an event like this. We've had hundreds of house parties in backyards and living rooms for the first 14 months or so. Now we're turning those operations online. I do town hall meetings twice a week, Tuesdays at 5 Mountain, Fridays at noon. We've had Bill McKibben, who founded 350.org, is one of our guests. Wendell Potter, some of you know, the ex-Cigna VP, who is one of the leaders of the single payer movement. I'm about to announce an endorsement from Adi Barkan, which makes me very proud. We'll have some video around that. So you can come to a virtual town hall or host your own event if you got friends who are interested in hearing this message. The only way we're going to win this race, the only way, is if we can mobilize the national progressive movement to converge, at least virtually, on Colorado. If nobody notices, Hick will just buy the nomination. And maybe he'll beat Gardner, maybe he won't, but he'll be a pretty mediocre senator by his own account. And we can do better. We only have 2 seats per state, right, in the U.S. Senate. We ought to use at least one of them to make a difference.
Absolutely. I hope we get to use both of them. So another question that's come in is, are you supported by labor? And if so, which labor organizations?
So the AFL-CIO in Colorado has decided, unfortunately, to sit out the primary. I suppose that's a victory for me because they're under immense pressure from the Washington establishment to put their thumb on the scale of Hick. His record on labor doesn't merit that, and they saw through that and decided to be neutral. So we're courting the endorsements of individual labor unions in the absence of the umbrella's support. And we picked up support. For example, today I was on the phone with the letter carriers here in Metro Denver who are supporting my campaign. And we're trying to get support from other individual unions as well, as I've had in virtually every race I've ever run.
Great.
Yeah.
And just for your campaign, Amar Shergill, who is the California Progressive Caucus chair in the Democratic Party in California, is asking to share the texting link so that we can push that out to the California Progressive Caucus folks here.
Yeah, please do. You can find all of our links at andrewromanoff.com, and there's a tab to get involved. I'm proud to say, in addition to PDA, we've gotten endorsements from Food and Water Watch, from Our Revolution, from the Sunrise Movement, as I mentioned earlier. So a lot of progressives understand that this seat is the single best chance to flip, and not just from red to blue, but from paralysis to progress, which is what our campaign is about. We just need more allies now.
That's wonderful. I believe that we have a few more minutes if people wanted to ask a question. Otherwise, do you have any closing remarks or things that you wanted to leave us with? We're going to definitely try to generate some support and put all of the information that Caroline has very kindly put into our chat box out to all of our members in California. But any last remarks?
Yeah, I'll share with you one other story because it is really front and center in my mind right now. I mentioned earlier that I've texted about 600,000 people in the last 8 weeks or so, trying to reach people virtually, even if I can't reach them at their doorstep. And it's been a painful conversation, a series of conversations with Coloradans who are hurting. I'll share one story. I've talked to folks who are facing eviction, worried about where their next paycheck is going to come from because they're losing their jobs and the healthcare that comes with it. I talked to a fellow the last several nights in a row who's living in his car in a suburb west of Denver called Lakewood.
Yeah.
He doesn't know not only where he's going to get fed, but even if he's got enough to drink. He doesn't want to go to a shelter because he figures that's too dangerous at a place to sleep right now. So he's sleeping in his car. And at one point, late at night, we were talking back and forth on text until about midnight. He said to me this. He said, "It feels like I don't exist. It feels like I don't exist." I couldn't see him, but I told him, "You exist. I mean, you're real, you matter, and you deserve," I didn't say this, but I believe it, "you deserve the ear of a congressperson or a senator not because of your net worth, but just because of your basic worth as a human being. That's the principle we've lost in the kind of pay-to-play politics that have corrupted Congress. I didn't ask him to make a campaign contribution. I'm asking you to do that. But I thought if every senator and every representative in Washington actually took the time I'm trying to take to listen to their constituents one at a time, if that's possible, and I think it is, you would dramatically transform the decisions that emerge from that town. I know there's not a sign outside the US Senate that says only millionaires need apply, but there might as well be. I'm not a millionaire. I can't buy this nomination, and you shouldn't have to. I mean, we ought to restore this principle before all hope is lost. And this strikes me as the best possible time to do it. In the worst possible moment we've experienced, in the middle of this pandemic, we ought to make clear that going back to normal isn't good enough, that business as usual wasn't working, that the gap between rich and poor wider than at any point in 100 years, the racial disparity in America, the brutality we saw tonight in Minneapolis, that these crises demand bold leadership. I tell folks this is a New Deal moment, but it better be a Green New Deal moment for America to combat the climate crisis, to put people back to work, to secure healthcare for all, and literally to rescue life on Earth. Those are the stakes. I know you understand that. I'd love to have your help.
Thank you so much. You're just very inspiring. I'm really, really honored to have you here, and I hope all of us will be able to do as much as we can for you and your campaign. And I just loved all of your remarks and appreciate where you're coming from. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Now I'm going to pass it forward to my comrade, Robin. Robin, take it away.
Hi there. Hi there. Is Steve here?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay, I was trying to find you here. So, yeah, I'm Robin Kropp, steering committee member with SFPDA, and I just want to say, haven't our candidates been fantastic tonight? Just fantastic. I think we're so blessed to have heard from all of them. It is so inspiring. So, feeling really moved by everyone, and I hope everyone wins their races. Okay, so it is my honor now to introduce someone who's not running for office this time around, Steve Cobble. Steve helped co-found the PDA in 2004, and he is on the advisory board and has served as political director ever since. He is also an associate fellow with the Washington, D.C.-based Institute for Policy Studies. Steve has worked on many political campaigns, including for Jesse Jackson in 1988, Arizona Governor Tony Anaya, Illinois Senator Carol Moseley Braun, and Dennis Kucinich. Steve also conducted election training workshops for the African National Congress in South Africa, was involved in post-election battle over suppression of African American votes in Ohio 2004, and he works with Free Speech for People, a growing movement to roll back the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, of which we've heard a little bit about in testimony. Steve is here tonight to give us his thoughts on the broad picture of the 2020 Senate races. We would be interested in also hearing your evaluation as to which races are flippable. And we would also like to hear your thoughts on the close Democratic Massachusetts race, as well as any other progressive candidates you'd like to discuss. So Steve, take it away.
Thank you very much, Robin, and thanks everybody for having me. I want to add one more thing to the introduction, which is that along with you all, I helped start the Draft Bernie Sanders for President movement back in 2014, 6 years ago this month.
Okay.
We had a convention in Western Massachusetts. Maybe some of you were there, but there were 300 or 400 people, and Tim Carpenter got Bernie Sanders to come, and we started the Run Bernie Run movement. PDA was first. PDA was there solid for 6 straight years for Bernie. And I want to thank California for doing its job on Super Tuesday. And if we'd had 1 or 2 more states do their job, you know, we might be living in a really different political environment at the moment. It was a pleasure to sit here and listen to Paula and Andrew and Betsy, the high quality of the candidates that we have running as challengers in these races with a chance to win. And they don't have enough money. They don't get any coverage and they don't get any help from the establishment. But we also don't know who's going to vote on primary day. And there is a possibility that the people with the passion will vote on primary day, that the primaries may look more like caucuses. And as we remember from 4 years ago, Bernie dominated the caucuses because his voters cared about him. And I think Romanoff's and Sweet's and Swearengin's voters will care about them. So anything we can do to help them would be great. There's another race I was asked to comment on. That's the Ed Markey, Joe Kennedy race in Massachusetts. And it's kind of a shameful race. I mean, basically, nobody in Massachusetts had any complaints about Ed Markey. Maybe he doesn't quite have a big enough ego. Maybe he doesn't run around and thump his chest enough, so he's not quite as well known as other incumbent United States senators are. But for crying out loud, he's the Senate sponsor of the Green New Deal. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is the House sponsor. This is the bill we need, the set of policies we need to survive the next decade and to hand over a globe to our kids and our grandkids. And Joe Kennedy is going to run against Markey because he's got a name and he can raise more money. And he doesn't actually have a policy difference that matters, that he's better than Markey is. So anything PDA-endorsed Ed Markey, some of us I can see are my age. We remember Ed Markey from the nuclear freeze movement and from taking on the nuclear industry back when people didn't used to do that. And he's been one of the good guys for an awful long time. So anything PDA can do to help on that race would be a big deal. It's a close race. The polls that they've had show Kennedy with a lead. But again, I don't think Kennedy's voters are in love with him. I think they're in love with John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Ted Kennedy. And unfortunately, Bobby's been gone for about 52 years now. So I think, again, Markey can pull that race out. If he wins the primary, he'll win the general. He's been endorsed by Elizabeth Warren, by PDA, by the Sunrise Movement, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters. Basically, the people we care about are siding with Markey. On some of the other Senate races, unfortunately, a lot of them do not have the quality of candidates that you saw tonight. There's a couple that we would care about. There's a Reverend Warnock's running an uphill race in Georgia. He's the pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church. And we actually needed him to do quite well because Joe Lieberman's son decided that he needed to run too. And so there's a possibility that the two Republicans will edge out the two Democrats and we'll end up with a special election that just has two Republicans in it. So we need Reverend Warnock to A, win because he's the better candidate, and B, we need to make sure he finishes at least second in the first round so he can get to a runoff. And this is the election that might be a runoff in January, which could be a really cosmic election if the Senate was, say, 50-50 at that point, or 50-49. And that's entirely possible. The current ratio, as you all know, is 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats. And one of the incumbent Democrats is Doug Jones, who's a fairly decent guy considering he comes from Alabama. But unfortunately, he's not going to get to run against the pedophile again. He might get to run against Jeff Sessions, which is not quite as weird as Roy Moore, but still kind of weird. But probably he's going to get to run against the Auburn football coach, which seems like a dumb thing to do, to send the football coach to the Senate, but that Alabama, that's a big deal. Too bad. I guess we should have run the Alabama football coach instead. But if you can see to it, we probably need Doug Jones to win. It's an uphill battle. The state is going to be very red in November. And so we might be actually 4 seats that we have to win, plus the presidency and the vice presidency to win the Senate back. And so one way that you all could think about any Senate race you come across, whether you like the Democrat very much or not, is that this is really about Mitch McConnell. They're all stand-ins for McConnell. He has turned the Senate into essentially a state legislature where he controls the agenda. He has veto power over not just whether a bill passes or not, whether it even gets heard or not, when the House Democrats pass a bill, it doesn't even appear. And as we found out, he doesn't have to hold hearings on Supreme Court judges. He can take a vacation during a pandemic virus. He basically treats it like his own fiefdom. And if we have a Democratic president next January that we can push on things we care about, like climate, which will be our job in January, and we all know it, we're going to get a lot farther if we don't have to go through Mitch McConnell. So there are 6 or 7 races in the West, which are potentially flippable. I believe the person that follows me knows a lot more about these than I do, but that includes Colorado, Arizona, where the astronaut Mark Kelly is running. A little further out, it possibly includes Texas. Flip the West is expanding the boundaries of the West, and they're including Iowa in the West, which is fine. And I hope it works because I'd like to see him flip Joni Ernst out of there. And there's a possibility in Kansas, especially if we get the paranoid voter fraud crazy man, Kurt Kobach, as the Republican nominee. That would increase Dr. Boyer's chances of winning that race. Alaska even is an outside shot. And I'm leaving one off there. Montana, where Steve Bullock is. Some of you saw him in the presidential races. I don't know why he decided to show off his too conservative side. He's actually a pretty progressive guy and a leader on campaign finance issues for the whole country. And he would be a pretty good senator from Montana. The other races that are flippable are you've got Maine, the race Betsy Sweet was here trying to win the primary. She has an uphill race in the primary. One thing she didn't mention is that people around the country raised $4 million to go to the winner of the Democratic primary the next day to defeat Susan Collins. They were so upset with the Supreme Court hearings where she helped put Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court. They raised $4 million so that there will be an immediate relief on money for the nominee for the Democrats in Maine. And that's a good thing, especially if it's Betsy, who has, as she told you, has not had the ear of the Emily's List or the Senate Campaign Committee or anything else. There's a good race in North Carolina. There are 2 races in Georgia. They're a little longer shots, but we could have a white candidate on one and an African-American candidate for the other seat, which would be a good would help us run and help make Georgia a little more purple. There's 2 very special races that you would love to see upsets in: South Carolina on Lindsey Graham, and of course Kentucky with Mitch McConnell. And normally you would not think that we would beat them in a presidential year in 2 very red states, except that progressives so dislike the way that they've handled their jobs that their opponents are extremely well funded. And Amy McGrath and Charles Booker, whoever wins that nomination in Kentucky. Charles Booker is more progressive. He has less money. Jamie Harrison in South Carolina, if he wins, they will have all the money they need, and neither of their opponents is popular in their own states. So they're actually, McConnell and Graham will be looking to Donald Trump to carry them across the finish line in November. And there's one other race I should mention that we should keep an eye on, races like New Hampshire, make sure that the Democrat does okay. But the Republicans are targeting Michigan. Gary Peters is the Democratic incumbent. Obviously, both the Democrats and Republicans are trying to win Michigan. So this is one where the Senate race is likely to go the same way as the presidential race. So hopefully we will win both. And I'll be happy to take questions on this. I can't overemphasize how important these Senate races are. And anyone that you feel compelled to help in would be a valuable thing to do. It's the only way we can get any kind of dynamic going between the Progressive Caucus and the House, trying to push Pelosi with grassroots pressure on our new president, and no Mitch McConnell in the way, just stopping the agenda right there. We have to be able to have a system where we have the power from the grassroots to put pressure on a Democrat Senate Majority Leader as well as the House and the President. And so we need to win 3 plus the White House plus Doug Jones, or 4 plus the White House. And I'll stop there, and PDA can play a part in that.
Okay. Do we have some questions here from people listening? If we don't, I'll ask something, but I just want to know if anyone has some. Oh, I see a question here. Good candidate to support against Mitch. My understanding, he has 3 Democrats running: Charles Booker, Amy McGrath, and Mike Boyer. I guess my question is, do they have a chance to win against McConnell?
So a lot of progressive voices have gotten behind Charles Booker. He's a state representative, he's African-American. Kentucky's, as you all probably remember from your history, is a border state. It's not as African-American as the Deep South is. I think Charles is going to have a tough race in November. The Democratic establishment will not like it if he wins. But he has a tough race already because the favorite Democratic nominee is a woman named Amy McGrath, who ran a close race for Congress last time. She's a former helicopter pilot. You probably saw her ads 2 years ago. They were pretty good ads. She ran in a very red district and lost by a couple thousand votes, very close race. Turned around, decided to run against McConnell. She has raised more money than he has. She is getting money from all over the country and is very well funded. If money and a military background can win an election in Kentucky, then she has a chance.
Mm-hmm.
But Kentucky, for reasons known only to Kentuckians, is a red state. It's one of those states that, Thomas Frank would have, even Thomas Frank would have trouble explaining why they behave the way they do. But very likely that Trump is going to carry that state in the fall, which is going to make it difficult for the Democratic nominee. Having said that, Mitch McConnell's made himself very unpopular even in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
There is a chance that he could be defeated.
Okay. Let's see, any other questions here? I could ask another couple, but I just want to know if people have any. I don't see any questions here. Anybody got something? Okay, here's one, a little bit off topic. Well, okay, that's presidential at the top. Odds of Biden versus Trump, they're asking.
Well, I'll comment on that because it affects the Senate races. One of the things we saw in 2016 was you take a state like Wisconsin, Russ Feingold, who had been elected there several times, didn't run any better than Hillary Clinton did. It basically became two tag teams. And that turned out to be to Feingold's detriment, because by all rights, Feingold should have run a few thousand votes ahead of Hillary Clinton, given that he was already known in the States, that he opposed the trade bills, that he had been a campaign finance guy. And yet they basically got the same vote. The same thing happened in Pennsylvania, where the Senate, Katie McGinney and Hillary Clinton basically ran the same. Same thing happened in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, Clinton and Maggie Hassan won by a small margin, but in the other states they lost. So what's happening in the states is the Senate races are, unfortunately, because so many states are smaller, medium-sized, and very white in the United States, you're getting nationalized Senate races the same years that you're having presidential races. And so, you know, Joe Biden's going to win California by 3 million votes. He's going to win New York by 1 million. He's going to win Illinois by a huge margin. He's probably going to win the country by a big margin, just like Hillary Clinton did. And you'd think, well, 23 of the 35 states that are up right now have Republican senators. That should be pretty good for the Democrats. We should have lots of targets. And that's true. But only 2 of those states, Colorado and Arizona, Colorado and Maine, are states that Hillary carried. Arizona's a state maybe she could have carried if she put a little more attention to it early, but that's another story. There is a chance right now that this could be a wave election. Donald Trump is starting to lose some support, and he's managed to sort of wave a magic wand over everybody's eyes for a long time. Whoa, he's got the entire Republican Party behind him. He's, you know, no Republican's ever been as unified as him. Well, part of the reason for that is that he's pissed everybody else off. So he's got a unified 43%. Well, 43% was not enough to elect Mike Dukakis. George McGovern, my first presidential campaign almost 50 years ago, we got our butt kicked. We got 39%. I mean, that's not far from 43%. Donald Trump, if he loses his grip on old white people and making them go out in a coronavirus pandemic by forcing everybody to go to back work early, is probably a good way to scare some of your older voters who are not working and are also noticing that you're messing with Social Security. You may end up with the worst of both worlds here. You're not going to convince young voters you're for them, and you might scare your old white voters that you're opening up the country again too early and making everybody sick again. So there is a possibility of a blue wave. That would be the most important thing that would win us the Senate, as well as the presidency. Obviously, it would keep the House. And guess what? If we were going to have a blue wave, 2020 would be the year to do it, not just because of the Senate, but because it's a census year, which means we would win some state legislators back too, and we would get some redistricting done and make the country much fairer in the way it represents us for the next 10 years. So you can't predict anything. None of us know what's going to happen next with the economy, with the virus, with, you know, whatever secret drug Donald Trump's going to start drinking next week that his kid wants to sell somewhere. We don't know any of those things, what's going to happen. But my feeling on it is that it feels to me like his vote is fraying a little. And it has not frayed very much all along. We have a chance for a wave. And that means we can win the Senate back.
Yeah, I wanted to say I agree with you. It's possible that COVID has made us very vulnerable, and I think we're going to get a nice surprise come November. I do.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, it's terrible. Tomorrow it's going to be 100,000 dead. Well, 100,000 reported dead. As we know, it's really more than that.
Yeah.
But that's not a number given that 2 months ago he was telling us it was going to go back to 0.
It's not a number to celebrate either.
Not a number to
That's
celebrate.
coming across too, that he
It
wants
is
to
a-
celebrate that number. with
That's
him.
right. He's golfing. It turns to 100,000. It's a number that people will pay attention to, I think.
Right. Well, are we at time, Shirley? Shirley, do I discuss any more? Are we at time at this point? Where's Shirley? Anyway, I
There I
think
am.
I
Yes,
think I
there
go
is
until
time.
7:45 with you. So I want to thank you so much for participating tonight as our first non-candidate, but equally important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much, and thanks for everything you did for PDA and Bernie, because I know you all were there, and
Yeah,
Yes.
we came that close.
yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Steve. You always have great insights. I love them. So a different type of analysis is our final speaker from Flip the West. And I want to introduce Andrew Kim, who follows PDA's pattern of working both inside the Democratic Party and outside the Democratic Party. We'll find on his website, flipthewest.com, that there's a lot of indivisible groups supporting Flip the West. And of course, Andrew himself was campaign manager for John Garamendi, who those of us in California know quite well. So he has a lot of political experience, and the success of Flip the West in 2018 was remarkable, and I'm sure he's going to share that with you. And then he's going to go into what we're doing now, he's doing, and any group that wants to support him, and it may be PDA as well, for 2020 and the senatorial races in the West. So take it away, Andrew.
Thank you. I was hoping when you get a chance, Shirley, if you could give me access to share my screen.
Let's see. I see
And
a
then-
share screen button right down here. And which one is you?
And while we get set up, just want to say thank you to the PDA, SF, and Oakland leadership for the invitation, and for everyone joining us tonight and your interest in helping us take back the Senate. In this campaign to retire Mitch McConnell, we are a family, and we have brothers and sisters in battleground states that really need our help, potentially more now than even before. For Flip the West, we've been doing a lot of analysis on what happened in Congressional District 25 earlier this month. And I'm currently working on a white paper, and it could be seen as a point of concern. We're talking about the fact that there are 30,000 more registered Democrats, 7% lead in CD 25, but we lost by close to 10%. And that was because not only was it all vote by mail, where Republicans submitted their ballots in higher numbers earlier on, which helps with ballot chasing, but there was no canvassing. And when you think about grassroots movements and congressional campaigns and Senate campaigns in battleground states, canvassing is so important. And a big piece of Flip the West and Flip the 14 in 2018 was that we paid for multiple canvassing operations in all 14 congressional districts in California. Now that there's no canvassing, there's a series of issues. First, the entire voter file is shrunk. Like the idea of being able to canvass is, in theory, you can talk to every Democratic voter. Now we can only talk to Democratic voters that have a phone number. And I know at least double-digit organizations that are all transitioning from canvassing to phone banking, who are all going to call the same limited voter file, which is going to only accelerate voter fatigue. So there's a series of different issues, and why your involvement tonight in helping us take back the Senate is so important. Let's see, I'm still waiting for share screen. While I do, I'll give you some sneak peeks on some of the other findings in our white paper. Again, as I mentioned, not having to canvass is in many ways levels the playing field for Republicans who were never planning on canvassing anyway. Just really their strategy is fake news. But for Democratic campaigns, ever since the Obama campaign, canvassing door to door, precinct to precinct, neighbor to neighbor has been an important piece, not only to talk to voters, but to build a movement, to build a neighborhood team that can then export blue power. not being able to do that, not being able to do neighborhood house parties, not being able to create that opportunity for organizing already is a major setback. And I don't want to freak people out, but I just came back from a series of meetings with battleground partners who have shared some pretty concerning news about the state of organizing. So for example, in Arizona, there are in total statewide 40 indivisible groups. And if you think about that, in California, we have over 800 indivisible groups. In Arizona, there's 40. And out of the 40, really only 15 of them have done electoral action or doing any kind of electoral action. And since the pandemic, only 6 or 7 have been able to even do a membership meeting, let alone do any electoral action. And so, and this is due to the fact that many of the grassroots leaders passed away due to COVID. Okay, now we can share screens. So I'll share more of that, the white paper on both the results of the CD25 election and our post-pandemic pivot plans on this coming Wednesday. Today, we want to share the pathway to victory on what's our plan on flipping the Senate. One recommendation we have for all of everybody here is that since we're going to be on the phones, potentially only phones or texting, it's so important that we're able to tell our story better. So the challenge that I have is, can you share your story of why we need to flip the Senate in less than 5 words? Can you say it in less than 5 words? Eventually, can you say it in less than 3 words? And the ultimate goal is being able to say it in 1 word. Okay, so our strategy is our focus, our request for grassroots groups. And again, that's why I'm so grateful for PDA, San Francisco, Oakland, for focusing on flipping the Senate. Why? 2 reasons. Number one, we have a very viable chance, an opportunity. I think it was said before, in 2018, we had to flip 24 House seats. This 2020, we only need to flip 4. And as the previous speaker, Steve, mentioned, since 2018, the Democratic House passed over 380 bills on election security, healthcare access, being able to lower prescription drug costs, but all of these are being blocked by Mitch McConnell. So in many ways, flipping the Senate is such an important priority. So our strategy is focusing in the West. And why? For 2 reasons. Number one, because a lot of these Western states have similar electoral demographics as California. What are we talking about? Arizona, 1.3 million voters are Latinx. That's close to 30% of the voting population. We're talking about in Texas, even more so. Actually, it's 5.6 million voters are Latinx. In South Texas, close to 60% of the voting population is Latinx. Secondly, in many of these battleground states, the most important voting demographic is what we call decline to state voters, unaffiliated voters, independent voters. And both recent polling and our own field operations indicate that a majority of independent voters are not voting for Donald Trump. That provides a huge opportunity for us to be able to leverage that for the Senate elections. So the second reason is down ballot, up and down ballot implications. So these states that we are targeting have up ballot implications because they have major implications for the Electoral College, but significant down ballot implications. For example, Arizona, their state legislature, which has been controlled by the Republicans close to 30 years, all they need to do is flip 3 state Senate seats called the legislative district seats. And there are close to 6 that are up for grabs, 4 that are in less than 3% margin. And in Texas, there are 30 congressional seats up for grabs, 9 of them that are in striking distance. So what is our main strategy? It is what we call pathway to victory through field. And so as mentioned before, I was a campaign manager in 2014 for John Garamendi. And this was when he was designated as a frontline DCCC candidate. And it was out of the 8 counties, 5 of the counties had a Republican voter registration advantage. It meant that the DCCC gave me enough money, in theory, a field budget where we can pay for the exact theoretical amount of phone calls and door knocks and texts that need to be done to account for the voter deficit or the win number. So that's what we call a pathway to victory field plan. It's essentially projecting exactly how many phone calls do you need to make to achieve a theoretical mathematical pathway to victory. And we're going to count total amount of voter contacts, voter conversions, ballot confirmations. It really comes down to person-to-person contact, face-to-face. And that also requires organizing because you have to build a team to do so. And what am I talking about when I talk about field? I mean, there are 7 different ways of how consultants do persuading voters, right? TV, mail, digital. Then the last 4 is what I would call field: postcarding, texting, phone banking, canvassing. And essentially the idea is to be able to have like a live person. Why do we believe person-to-person is more effective than TV? For 3 reasons. Number 1, it's measurable. Unlike TV, we really don't know if you've seen the TV ad or read the mailer, or let alone you're convinced by it. A phone call, or when someone knocks on your door, really quickly, we can tell, are you going to vote yes or no? If not, you're undecided why. Then in the future, all of our targeting could be micro-targeted to that issue. Number 2, it's memorable because it's not just about the messaging points. It's not just about the facts. It's about an emotional connection, emotional response. And that's where telling your story is so important, so memorable. When the voter gets to the sees their ballot, they remember that nice lady who shared her story, or that young man who was explaining why they were volunteering. And third, it's meaningful because it's not about just your story, but the story of our movement, that this year we cannot stand still when Mitch McConnell is leading an agenda driven on corruption, authoritarianism, and inequality. So 2 ways of doing the pathway to, 2 phases in the pathway to victory. First is what I call phase 1, voter deficit reduction. And there's 2 ways to close the voter deficit. One is increasing base voters, and that's registering new Democrats or engaging what we call low propensity Democrats who are about to fall off the voter roll. Second is swing voter persuasion. And we're talking about independent voters. We're talking about even some Republican voters. However, when Flip the West to swing voter persuasion, it's very targeted. For example, at this point, we've already contacted 200,000 swing voters, but it was strategic. It was female voters in these battleground states under the age of 35 who voted the last 4 out of 5 election with a Democrat in household and a Democratic propensity score. So it's very targeted, and so that when we turn them out or we communicate with them, the likeliness of their engagement will be positive. Second phase is what we call GOTV, and that's for everybody who was so-called identified as a supporter. We need to make sure that they actually submit their ballot on time. And that's so important because one of the things that we saw in Congressional District 25 is the Republican parties were way more disciplined, not just submitting their ballot, but submitting their ballot early, which makes a difference. So there's 2 ways of doing a field pathway to victory field plan. Win number modeling, past voter deficit modeling. For today's activity, I'm gonna focus on past voter deficit modeling. It's much simpler. We're gonna just understand exactly how much did the Democrats lose in the last election cycle, and if we were to make X amount of phone calls, how are we gonna account for that deficit? Arizona, again, very interesting, 11 electoral college votes. Many consultants say that if Donald Trump loses Arizona, he only has like 2 pathway to victories left for the presidency. So Arizona is a very important battleground state, not only for the presidency, but also for the Senate. And as I mentioned, down ballot implication. What you'll notice in Arizona is that there are almost 180,000 more registered Republicans. That's a pretty significant advantage that the Republicans have. So we have to remember, this is a challenging state. This is not a walk in the park. In many ways, like how I explained this as an analogous to California, this would be like Congressional District 22, Devin Nunes, or Tom McClintock's district when we look proportionally the amount of Republicans and Democrats. So voter deficit modeling, if we were to look at all of the past 3 Senate elections, John McCain and Ann Kirkpatrick, where the Democrats lost by 328,000. Some would say you could use that as the last baseline, but most folks in Arizona would agree that Martha McSally is no John McCain. So we're actually going to use the 2012 election as a baseline for this activity. And we're going to look at Jeff Flake and Richard Carmona, where the Democrats lost by 67,000 votes. And so if we were to use that as a baseline, and we do a weighted average anywhere from 70 to 80,000, and we get, let's say, 75,000, then let's focus on a phone program. Exactly how many phone calls do we need to make to close that voter deficit? So let's say a single volunteer from PDA does a volunteer shift anywhere from 100 to 150 calls, let's say 120 calls for this like super shift, 10% contact rate at 72% conversion rate, which is our current conversion rate in Arizona. That means every time you volunteer, in theory, you're going to get 9 conversions, 9 new voters. So every time you volunteer, you could do -9 from the 75,000. If we were to then play out the field map, what we're saying is if we can recruit 595 volunteers in the next 5 months, 595 volunteers at 9 conversions each who can phone bank for 2 weeks, that would be about 1 million phone calls, but would account for the 75,000 voter conversion. And if I were to use grassroots language, what I'm saying is if we can host from now until election day, 5 months, 417 phone bank parties, where each virtual phone bank party recruits 20 volunteers each at 120 calls, 9 conversions each, boom, 1 million phone calls, 75,000 voter conversion, bye-bye Martha McSally. So that is in theory the pathway to victory for Arizona. We also did it for Montana. Montana is so interesting. Ever since Governor Steve Bullock jumped in the race, very much a game changer. Because although Montana, the Democratic so-called establishment infrastructure is at best incomplete and at worst dysfunctional. But Governor Steve Bullock has an infrastructure of his own and very popular. And so in many ways is a game changer. We're very excited about that. What's really interesting about Montana is the entire state of Montana. I'll say it this way, Congressional District 12, Nancy Pelosi's congressional district, has more likely voters, eligible registered voters, than the state of Montana. So the idea of being able to flip congressional seats in California, if we were to do apples to apples, then like a state like Montana, we believe field person-to-person conversion can really move the needle. So Montana is interesting. If we look at the Montana voter deficit modeling, what we're going to see is that the voter deficit, if we were to do a weighted average, is going to be anywhere from 35,000 to 45,000. And let's say a conservative projection, let's say around 40,000. This time, if you were to do the same field math, 10% contact rate, 72% conversion rate, we need in the next 5 months, recruit 317 volunteers, 9 conversions each, 2 weeks of phone calls for over 500,000 phone calls to close the voter deficit. And that means 222 phone bank parties in the next 5 months as PDA and all of our grassroots groups together. Colorado, we did the same thing. Colorado, again, interesting because Democrats have just barely a 1.5% Democratic voter registration advantage. And if we were to just think, Congressional District 25 had a 7% voter registration advantage. Like, again, it's not apples to apples, but what we're saying is we believe that COVID disproportionately impacted people of color and likely demographic that would vote progressive. It also affected many of our volunteers. Colorado is another case. Colorado, unlike Arizona, they have 100 indivisible groups, but out of the 100 indivisible groups since the pandemic, most of the groups haven't been able to activate because most of the groups, their folks are much older, and even the transition into digital has been slow, so we've lost a lot of momentum. But back to Colorado, very interesting because the voter deficit, again, very small, because if we look at how much did Cory Gardner win, how much did he beat Mark Udall by? Less than 40,000 votes, and this was in 2014, a very low projected Democratic turnout year. So if we were to use 40,000 as a voter deficit, again, very similar to Montana, it is similar to Montana. We're talking about 317 volunteers, 9 conversions each, 2 weeks of phone banking, over 500,000 phone calls, close the voter deficit, 222 phone bank parties. Texas, we did Texas, very debatable. Not everybody on Flip the West is on the same page for Texas, but Texas is interesting because if we are on paper traditionally, win number modeling, Texas is like very, very reach. But if we were to use baseline modeling of 2018, where Beto only lost by 2.6%, right, in Texas, many consultants are saying that if Beto ran in a presidential election year, it could have been a whole new Texas. But most interesting, again, Texas has a lot of congressional seats, right, that are up for grabs, less than 5% difference, striking distance. And again, if we are to use Beto's voter deficit, where again, he lost by less 214,000, we're talking about 1,700 volunteers, 2 weeks, 3 million phone calls, 1,100 phone bank parties. So we added all of this up. Those are 4 states that in theory, that if we can flip, boom. So if we add up those 4 states, what we're saying is about 8 million phone calls that need to be made and essentially 3,200 phone bank parties. And I'm not saying if we do that, we guarantee victory, but what I'm saying is if we do that, in theory, we account for the voter deficit. And what Flip the West, our plan is to do out of the 8 million, half of it. We want to do 4 million voter contacts. We think that's important. And out of the 3,200, we want to do at least 500 of the phone bank parties. In 2018, we reached over 1.5 million voters. And this was because of so many activists like yourself, who are not only phone banking, but hosting your own virtual phone bank parties. As of today, we have now reached over 1.7 million voters because we started in 2019. In Arizona, in 2019, we canvassed over 25 days, no door knocking. And so we've been building this infrastructure. However, because of the pandemic, we are now reevaluating all of our baseline assumptions in field. And anyone who thinks that field business as usual is going to be relevant in the new realities, is probably going to have something coming for them, because we saw what happened in CD25. They did business as usual. And business as usual, I think, has some issues because there's potential gaps in that. And so what we hope to do, not only transition everything into virtual, we're going to be introducing a series of strategies from deep canvassing, being able to, every phone call you make, you take ownership of that voter, not just for that moment, but until election day. Send them a personal email, send them a personal text, remind them, get them to pledge a +1, make sure that they submit their ballot on time, become the virtual precinct captain, right? And then we're gonna talk about relational organizing programs and a series of programs that I don't think I have enough time to go into, but we, if you're interested, we can share with you the white paper. Feel free to email me and I'll send you the white paper when completed. We have a couple programs that are active right now as we speak. So currently, if you are interested in phone banking, you click that link, you can phone bank on your own anytime when you want. We also have postcarding into Arizona. We also have phone banking in Colorado. And what's great about the Colorado phone bank is that when it's a GOTV phone bank, but for the name, it doesn't say Hickenlooper. It has this blank. And then so you can throw in Romanoff. And so we're very excited about the phone bank we have because it can easily be a Romanoff phone bank. So we have that going for Colorado. We also have postcarding Colorado, text banking Colorado. In California, you can postcard any of the congressional districts. You let us know which congressional district you want. We can do California. We're excited about our Montana postcard program. Our Montana postcard program took months to arrange the data sharing agreement. And then we have announced Iowa recently, like very recent. And why are we announcing these new states? One of the takeaways from the pandemic, not being able to canvass anymore, means that for phone banking, there is actually, you hit a point of diminishing returns where you're gonna just begin hitting voter fatigue at an accelerated rate. And so like only focusing on 4 states like may or may not make as much sense. So we are going to be expanding so that we can have as optimal of an impact without accelerating voter fatigue. And so we're going to be announcing, we announced Iowa, we have the access to the entire Iowa voter file. We're very excited about that. We're going to be doing Iowa texting, and then Iowa postcarding is going to come next. And then so our request that what we hope to ask PDA San Francisco and Oakland is if you're interested as a group to partner on what we call a joint virtual day of action. And a joint virtual day of action is an opportunity where everybody could jump on a Zoom call like this. And instead of making phone calls at home by yourself, it's this idea of community bonding where we're calling together. Everyone's on mute, but we're calling. We have good stories. We'll have speakers. We have breakout rooms for mixers. And the idea is to provide a great opportunity for first-time phone bankers, and we can co-host it for you. So meaning that you can totally be like branded as PDA, but on the behind the scenes, we can help with all the troubleshooting. And this is a service that we'd like to provide in a way that we can partner. And lastly, our final ask is if you're interested in joining your groups, PDA San Francisco or Oakland, interested in joining the Flip Force. And what that is going to be ongoing access to databases for all of the battleground states that I mentioned. And that's one of our main, that's our origin story, by the way. A lot of folks don't realize the Flip the 14, Flip the West origin story. It actually started after the Women's March in SF in Oakland. We had all of these consultants who came together, brought together actually initially by Senator Don Parada and Doug Linney, who said, there's all of these new pop-up groups. Where are they getting their data? How can we provide them all this data that's coordinated so that we can limit double, triple calling, that we can have quality control? And so one of the things that we've done in all of these battleground states is set up data sharing agreements with their statewide IE table, independent expenditure coordinated table. So every phone call you make, every wrong number that you have, you're cleaning up the database for the labor unions in Arizona. You're cleaning up the database for all of the progressive groups in Colorado or in Montana. Second, we have trainings every month, and it's a great opportunity for your leadership to join. We also provide advanced consulting to help your group, your PDA group, create a field plan from now until election day. And the question is, for PDA San Francisco, how many phone bank parties do you think you can host from now all the way to election day? Why is that so helpful for coordinated efforts? Because then we can see gaps. Same with PDA Oakland, from now until election day, how many postcard parties, how many phone bank parties? That could help. And then for us, again, we want to be able to do the joint virtual days of action. I have a couple more. The last slide I will end with, and this is, I think this is, if there's one, recommendation, best practice I can share for anybody working in the 2020 election cycle. This election cycle is unprecedented, and it's going to be much more challenging in many ways. It's going to be more demoralizing, more discouraging, more lonely. And a big piece of volunteering is the fellowship, and not being able to have that is going to be more challenging. So one of the things that I'm going to recommend is for each volunteer, for you to write your own volunteer action plan from now until election day. And that's when I was serving in AmeriCorps Vista, Volunteer in Service to America. One of the first things they said, if you're going to volunteer your time, make sure your volunteer time is as meaningful as possible, is as strategic as possible, that you make sure that you're happy when you're volunteering. And the best way to do that is plan that out. The next 5 months, ask how many hours are you going to put into phone banking for Arizona or into Montana? How much time, how much money? Because if you actually are able to plan out how much money, how much time, how many, what you're able to do is, at least if you spend all of this money and time, you're not going to be resentful because you've already planned it. But sometimes when you get the so-called volunteer burnout, is because you realize you spend way more time and energy and you don't feel thanked, because campaigns don't thank you. That's not what we signed up for. And so my request is for you to write your own volunteer action plan from now until election day. And we hope that that volunteer action plan includes work to help us flip the Senate. With that, thank you so much, PDA San Francisco and Oakland, for the invitation and for all you're doing to help us flip the Senate.
Andrew, that was really amazing, all the information you gave us in such a short amount of time. And we had a request, someone wanted to see the Arizona pathway one more time, just because it's our closest state. And I think maybe they're fantasizing they'll get to go on a road trip or something. But if you can pop that back up, that would really be.
And I'd be willing to share this slide deck with everybody in PDA.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
That's great. Because, one of the things I'm going to be doing is a follow-up email to everybody who participated today. Some people had to leave early, some people arrived late, and of course, some people didn't make it, of course. But I know that everyone would be thrilled to have this information and want to participate. So before we go, and I do 2 quick announcements, I want to know, does anyone have any other questions for Andrew? Because it was such a complete thing here. Let me just go 4 new messages. Okay. Is prior phone banking experience, I often felt at a disadvantage because I was calling from another state. Do you have a way around that?
That's a good point. The biggest issue is when they get a call from out of state, you're gonna just be screened out. They usually don't pick up your phone call, so you're gonna get low pickup rates. You can create your own Google voice number for Arizona, especially if you decide in your personal action plan that you're going to adopt the state Arizona. And that's that's another battleground secret, is instead of just deciding, oh, I'm going to do Arizona 1 week, I'm going to do Congressional District 10 1 week, I'm going to do Texas 1 week, there is significant value in what I call adopt the district or adopt the state. Because not only are you able to build expertise, build trust with local relationships on the ground, but you're able to build a knowledge base. And then you can commit like a Google number for that area code and call with that area code. When you call with the right area code, boom, it already increases the likelihood of pickup. But let's say you don't, like you still get no pickup. For Flip the West, our policy, our like golden policy is leave voicemails. I don't care what the campaigns say, leave a voicemail anyway. It takes like 30 seconds and you essentially fulfill the role of a robocall, which costs money, which is what the Republican Party pays for, robocall. So we like not just call, do a robocall. You're getting double value. And so like I always say, I don't care what Mark Kelly campaign says, I'm gonna leave a voicemail. And the voicemail could be 10 seconds, but it's always valuable. That's our policy. And so that's another way. When you're calling, they're seeing a number from San Francisco, but they hear the voicemail, and the voicemail is about kicking out Mitch McConnell. And they're like, and the next time they see a number from San Francisco, they're gonna be like, yeah, I'm all about that, right? So that's another way of addressing that issue. And the key thing that I've learned is that it doesn't matter if you're from out of state or in state. If you are knowledgeable about the local issues, boom, it doesn't even matter. They don't care. Like, I don't want to say they don't care, but like you're able to overcome a lot of, potential like issues of like, who are you? Why are you calling? But if you can get into local issues, so this is easier when you're canvassing. Like, so when I'm canvassing in a battleground state and I go into local issues, like I talk about Tucson mayoral election, right? And how we elected the first Latina. And people are like, they wouldn't even like assume that I'm from out of state. So that's another piece. Thank you for that question. I think it's an important question.
Yeah. And I have a question in terms of postcarding. Who pays for the postage, and what kind of fancy or non-fancy cards do you use to attract attention?
That's a really also good question that took us a long time to figure out for grassroots groups. So what we're able to do for every one of the states I mentioned, we can provide, so California, Iowa, Texas, Colorado, Arizona, Montana, 6 states, we can provide you the addresses. We can provide you the address, the name of the person and their mailing address. And we'll tell you Democrat or independent. And we'll also give you the messaging that was approved by the local leaders. Like, please talk about healthcare. You can kind of like write your own script, but they're gonna be like, talk about healthcare or talk about gun control, talk about women's rights. So like they kind of give us a cue. Drop it off at this point because it's part of their statewide postcarding plan. So we try our best to accommodate these battleground state requests. But for the actual postcard itself in the stamps, we're requesting for the volunteers to be able to sponsor that, because if we provide that for you, then the reporting requirements become crazy for us. And there's no way that we could do it because compliance, FEC compliance really makes it challenging. However, if you do it as a volunteer, as a grassroots volunteer, that does not need to be reported. My number one request and recommendation is don't do fancy, slick postcards. The ideal postcard is a postcard that you get, and it looks like your nephew, your 13-year-old nephew made it. And you're like, oh, this is nice. And it has their first name written, like in pen, and there's colors, and like, oh, right. Because what you're able to do is buy yourself 40 more seconds before they throw it away. That's really the goal. You want to buy yourself 40 more seconds. And the more personalized, the more it seems like someone from your family made it to you, you bought yourself that extra time. If it's slick and it looks like a mailer, they're going to just throw it away. They're not, you don't have the 40 seconds.
So your website is flipthewest.com, correct?
Yes.
And you're going to send us the card deck, so we'll have all the contact people for the different things.
Yes.
And would you like us to organize as a group, or do you want each person to contact your people individually?
So we can do all of the above for folks who want to take action tomorrow. So every day we host a virtual phone bank room, where if you jump in, you're going to be surrounded by people from like in a Zoom call just like this. And we're going to be making calls together. Either it could be Arizona. Right now we're doing Arizona, but when we get closer to GOTV, we're going to do Montana, Colorado, Iowa. Iowa is June 2nd, so it's coming up soon. So you could do it or you could do it by yourself at home without, joining a Zoom call, because you don't need any training. You don't need any fellowship. You're a warrior, and you don't need anyone telling you what to do. So there's that way. Individually, you can join one of our groups, or what I mentioned earlier is if we can co-host a joint day of action, a joint virtual day of action, where you can say, next Friday, we're going to do a virtual joint day of action. Everybody jump on this Zoom call. We're going to have this trainer. They're going to train us on everything. And then we're going to have we're going to do an icebreaker thing. And then in addition, we're going to do a power hour where all of us do a call together. And anytime you get a yes vote, write "Go Blue" on the chat box, and it feels cool. And then we can share a story. And maybe we'll have a keynote speaker. And so we can do something like that. And that's a great way of bringing in people who have never done phone banking before, because most of our volunteers hate phone banking. They literally think that phone banking is like the worst, but it's the only thing we have left. And if we're not phone banking, and we're not phone banking at our highest quality and excellence, then we're missing out, because every day we get closer to election, we're not talking to enough voters and building those relationships, which take months to develop. So again, thank you for that question.
One more question, please. I don't want to keep everybody forever, but Montana is coming up with their primary on the 2nd of June. So we, of course, as Bernie supporters, would want to get as many delegates as possible for Bernie. Is there any protocol for both doing calls for your goals of the Senate in Montana, and at the same time dropping a hint to vote for Bernie as well?
That's an interesting question. The official answer is, let me get back to you.
Okay, not a problem.
How we would do that. I think there's a way we could do that, but I don't want to say something that could get me in trouble. So I'll say official answer, I'll get back to you. The unofficial answer, that's off the record, and don't hold me to it, is when you write a postcard to Montana, you can kind of do your own flair. Kind of we always say that the script is a guideline, right? And I know so many volunteers that don't really follow the script. And so if you kind of have your own flair, that I think can, under that premise, I think you can get in your message. Again, official answer, I'll have to get back to you.
Not a problem. So last thing, I think we're going to thank you tremendously. And I see Caroline Gaines is still here from Andrew Romanoff's campaign. Thanks for jumping on and being with us tonight. And again, all the candidates were fabulous, and Steve Cobble was amazing. So Andrew, you really got us ready to rock and roll. And I thank you so much for that. And the other thing, of course, is if you're a Californian and you want to vote for a Bernie delegate, you have to apply by Thursday at 5 p.m. online. So I'll be sending the link one more time if you haven't already done that. Any other questions for the night before we all go and jump in an ice cold bath? All right.
Shirley?
Yes.
This is Sherry. And,
Yes.
and you were kind enough to mention that I was a candidate, but I have withdrawn.
Oh, you have? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
There's a lot of good people that are running in CD13, and the DNC has not determined if it's going to be virtual or in person. And I just feel like it's not fair to run because I cannot go if it's an in-person convention. So I have withdrawn. But there's a lot of good people in CD13.
Absolutely. And we have Hemming Cho, who's running in San Francisco. So Mike Fowler, do you have any San Diego people that are running on the line here, or other Southern California people? Oh, and we have Martha Hawthorne. Are you still there, Martha? I see the name. Where are you? There
Hi
she is.
there.
Are you still running?
Well, you know, I'm still trying to figure it out. I am so committed to there being a union voice among delegates, but I believe if Kayla and Hemin run, I won't need to, because we have 3 delegates and 1 alternate, and 2 of them need to be women, so that would be those 2. My time might be better spent in flipping the West and our local election.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you. We each have our own decision to make as to what we're going to do with our time until November 3rd. So lots to do, and I love you all for being here, and we'll talk again. And we're going to make this recording on our YouTube channel so you can spread it far and wide. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley.
All
You did
right.
great. What a great
Thank
night.
you.
All
Bye.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, nice to meet Caroline after all those
Meet
emails.
everyone. Love to be out in San Francisco, but another time.
Yeah.
Visit us next time.
Okay.
Next time. Thanks.
Ciao. Mike, thank you for all your help. Mary, thanks for checking the chat.
Thank
Jim,
you, Mary.
Robin, great hosting. And Kathleen Coughlin, where are you from? Whoop, let me unmute you. Wait, let me unmute you. Okay, where are you from?
I live in San Diego.
Oh, so you know Mike Fowler.
No, I don't know Mike.
Oh,
No.
well, you better know him. He's like the coolest guy you ever want to know in
Okay,
San
great.
Diego. at least. All right.
She might know my parole officer.
Oh, is that?
Great way to meet.
All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. It's been a pleasure.
Okay.